Because my goal, and my team who does this work every single day, my therapist goal is to help you understand 3 hours before you even abused your partner, when your boss was a jerk to you at work, and you let that percolate, went out, had a couple beers with the buddies at the bar, and now go home and take all of that stress and anxiety out on your loved one and your kids. Let's talk about how we get to where you and your boss had a difficult conversation and how we process that. Because we've got to understand the gateways to our anger in this space, and that, when we rob men of the ability to support and serve. Really, we still have a very 1960s, like, as much as the feminist movement has helped us gain equality and women are an incredibly important part of the workspace, we still have somewhat of a baked idea, and it's depending on your cultural background, men should provide and support. That is still, whether or not we all want to agree, it's still pretty there, right? But what happens then when we rob men of that ability to support their families or their lifestyles, or, right, we rob you of that ability? We have created some anger in that, right, as a society in whole. And when we look at, I encourage people, when you look at unemployment rates, don't just look at the one ubiquitous metric of unemployment across the country. Look in your low-income neighborhoods and then start to understand, we're robbing people, men in particular, the opportunity to do what society tells men they're supposed to do. Well, if you're in that kind of friction every single day, that is not a healthy place to be, right? So how do we solve for, yes, the feelings of anger and all of these things, but then some of the larger societal constructs that create those situations? How do we solve for that? How do we create job opportunities, right? Once you have an abusive partner charge on your record, now we've created even another barrier for you, right, to get employed and to get work. So we haven't done anything to make you less angry, which is why, for our abusive partners, that program is expanding to have workforce development, housing opportunities, and all those kinds of things. Because what I see a lot in my work is my survivors need the same sort of resources my abusive partners need. And so how do we, not that we're putting everybody together and having a kumbaya moment, but how do we provide some of that same trajectory for the abusive partner? Because my job at the end of the day is to end the cycle of domestic violence. I can't do that if I still have an angry, abusive partner. This epidemic of violence cannot be solved in a survivor-only system. And that's unfortunately what we've created. We've created the legal framework for abusive partners and the nonprofit, supportive, elevating empowerment framework for survivors. That's not working. It hasn't been working since the 70s when we started taking domestic violence seriously. So there's a whole lot baked in there around just the way that we've treated domestic violence, across the framework. And it's time for change is my, ultimate point from all of that. Is we have to do this work differently and more cohesively and holistically, because abusive partners need different mechanisms than simply the 26-week of court-mandated classes and jail, right? And fines and community service. That is the basket of things available for an abusive partner. They also need career coaching. They need support. They need to unpack some of their own childhood trauma. They need to be able to have hope that all of that's possible. And so largely the movement that I sit in, the domestic violence movement, deals only with the survivor side. And I think those days need to come to an end, because survivors are asking for it. Survivors are asking for therapy, for support, for help for their abusive partner. And so we need to listen, and we need to create a different framework.